In early 2020, I walked into a new role at a new organization, 3 weeks before a global pandemic shut everything down. I hadn't met most of the people I'd be working with in person yet. And the path to becoming CEO, which was the whole reason I'd said yes to this in the first place, felt a long way off. I'm Kim Bohr, host of Courage to Advance, and this episode is like any other I've done before. There's no outside guest today, and instead I'm sitting down with my colleague Mike, who has led this firm for decades and shaped it into what it is today. As of April 1st, I stepped into the CEO role, and Mike has moved into his next chapter as active chairperson of our board. This conversation was recorded as that transition became official. This is the story of how we got here, what it took, what surprised us, and what we hope it means for the clients and organizations we serve. We have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Mike, welcome back to Courage to Advance.
Thank you, Kim.
So today's conversation is a bit different from others we've had on the podcast. Today is about our story, specifically our succession planning and implementation journey, because on April 1st, you, Mike, will have handed over to me the CEO title. And we know from all of our own experience and the work we do with clients that no succession happens without a historical basis for which it starts. And so I'd love for you to tell us about your history before I joined when we were still Waldron and talk about how we've come to the place we are today.
All right. Well, thanks, Kim, very much. I'll hit the highlights of what really started the succession conversation. I had been a part of the business for 16 years at that point, 25 years now. So I've been around a while. I had my business partner, 50-50 owner in the business, in the Waldron business, founder of Waldron, Tom Waldron, pass away suddenly in 2017. We had very little time between the time that we knew that he was going to be ill and when he passed. And so it kicked me into high gear around something that we do with our clients and that I have done personally as a consultant, and that is help leadership teams with succession plans to have people in the wings should something happen, and or for a variety of reasons, people deciding to retire, so on and so forth. So I began to focus on that sort of tragic departure of Tom from a few different perspectives. It was a real jolt to the business, as you can imagine, and it was a real jolt to me. Tom was a friend and longtime business partner. And the emotional aspect of it was, as you can imagine, very difficult. But as I focused on the business, I really prioritized a number of things that I needed to really be very intentional about. And one was stability of the business. And along with that was retention, helping the team not just want to remain, but also continue to do what we do for our clients, because that's what is our purpose when we get up in the morning, and it is very values-based. And it's something that really ties people to the business. So really the third area after stability and retention was to focus on our strategic plan. And in the second year after Tom passed, and we had done some of the administrative things that we needed to do during that period of time around stability, was to reset the strategic plan and to really bring everybody's voices in. I had a very high priority on broadening the voice of our practice leaders in the operation of the business and its strategy. And so we ran a strategic planning process that was based in our purpose and our values, and put an exceptional strategic plan in place, the continuance of which has been updated a couple times since then. But really, that was kind of the pillars on which our strategy has unfolded over the past 7-8 years. That really pushed me to begin thinking, lastly, about succession. There's a tremendous amount of risk to the business, of a sole owner having something happen to them, hit by a bus, as many people say. And that would have been really tragic for the business without one, that strategic plan where everybody knew where we were going, and also having someone that had the capability to step in and do the whole job as the leader of the company. And so it was at that point that I began that search, and I began to network to people to try to identify candidates that I could get a deeper conversation with. But there was something that came up fairly suddenly, and that was the departure of our Pacific Northwest business development leader. And when they announced that they were going to leave, I really had to double down on trying to replace that person. Speaking of retention, right, is to replace that person. And that's how I got introduced to Kim, through a mutual business acquaintance.
And that time that you and I first met was, we were in a really interesting point of transition for both of us. I had just left Fierce, where I had been for a number of years helping to build that business, and was really excited to set off on my own. I had started to build my own consulting and leadership development and strategy business, and had clients I was starting to serve, and had written a book, and was really not interested in going back into another organization at that time. And I remember us having some lunches early on, because I know we both trusted the person who had really introduced us and wanted to, and felt that was a very valuable relationship. And so I remember us having those lunches and just getting to know each other. And what I really appreciated about that time together was not only just learning about the business, but learning about you, and seeing that you and I shared so much about how we think about business, how we think about our commitment to community, how we think about the pillars of what makes a healthy organization. And I really thought that was a very attractive alignment when we were first talking. But as you know and tell this story so well, I wasn't easily convinced to come over into the organization, because I was really wanting to build something that felt like it was really truly mine, and wanted to pursue that for a while and get my own thought leadership and my own way of just viewing the world through my business lens that I could. And so I think that was an interesting couple of years for us, to the opportunity to get to know one another. And, I remember I was really grateful to come in and be one of the consultants that did some of this work that, you spoke of, that we did around the CEO evaluations and some of the succession planning work and board work and coaching and things. And so it gave us some time to get to know each other a bit, which was really quite lovely.
Right, right. Yeah. So your answer originally was no, I'm not interested in
Yep,
that job.
that's correct.
Looking back at our experience once I met you, you immediately had said, no, that's not for me. And you told me what you were doing and what you were going to build. And in learning about you and what you were doing, it really caused me to start checking off some boxes that I had set out formally in a list of characteristics and criteria that I felt were absolutely necessary in my subsequent successor. And one of those things included, and it was a big one on the list, was having some entrepreneurial genes. And you were taking the risk. You were building a business. You had been a part of an entrepreneurial venture, and you had been COO of it. So that really ticked that box, that you were not intending to be an employee for the rest of your life. You were going to be an owner and a leader, and that was important. The second thing is, you had tried to buy a business previously with some other people, and after coming to agreement, that had subsequently failed to materialize. And I felt that experience of having one, you wanted to buy a business and you really went after it. You were disappointed when it failed. So having that experience of having a failed business purchase effort, I think, was even more important to me than trying to recruit you if you had bought a business. it really was an experience that I think was very valuable, and I really respected as an entrepreneur that you had had that experience. A couple of other things that were important was, your transparent and humble style. I felt was what our business culturally needed. And, your deep operational sensibility and your deep operational experience and business development experience were all factors that were a part of those criteria that I had. And then, most importantly, probably is how we see eye to eye in terms of shared values and shared purpose.
I completely agree. When I think back to that time as well, what I appreciated was in getting the chance to work inside the business for a while as a consultant was getting to understand just the quality of work that we did and the level of partnership that existed through those who were inside the organization, getting to understand what was so unique about how we approached things and that what really stood out. And I really liked the nature of was made up in the business, that we had this portfolio of work that really took us from an outplacement perspective all the way through, coaching, executive coaching and leadership development and CEO evaluations and board governance work. And it was this really lovely sector of the talent, portfolio that I think was really something wonderful to see inside the organization and had a lot of sustainability built into it as well. As much as I remember being as certain I didn't want to come back into a business, I also was really building a lot of interest and respect for what had been built. And I started to really see the possibilities of what could be. And I remember, though, as you and I have talked about many times, I wasn't going to come in, though, and give up what I had built without understanding what was really possible.
I guess it would be 2019. We had worked together with you as a consulting partner. In late 2019, how do you remember the ultimate conversation that you and I got into to agree on the role and then for you to say yes and come aboard?
Yeah. So, so much of it was around being really clear on what I wanted and setting those boundaries so that I didn't feel like I was compromising. And feeling I could trust you in those conversations and that our experience and what we would carve together would be different from past experiences that didn't have those promises fulfilled. And so for me, I remember really just being really clear that my path was to be a CEO. I was a CEO of my own organization, but I wanted to be a CEO of a larger organization, and that I would be willing to come in and start as the COO, where I would have more, responsibility, which I was used to and very much wanted, with the understanding that that would be the start of our work together and moving towards a succession path. And because when I set those boundaries, you leaned into the conversation, that had me changing the way I thought about being on my own. And it had me more interested in building something and starting to scale it and evolve it and taking it to the next level, which I really enjoy doing. I think one of the things that would be interesting to just talk about too is I came in at the end of February 2020 and we were
Good timing.
in an office and then the pandemic hit. And what was really quite a learning curve was not just understanding just the different nuances of the business. Some of it I knew very well and some of it I was very new to. It was also getting to know the people. And for something that was so jarring for all of us, that was a really interesting challenge to try to figure out how to have one-on-ones and get to know people and at the same time manage the urgency we were experiencing, because it really changed the nature of so much of our business as it did so many others. And trying to make those calls about where should we be putting our focus for the time period. And I think that was something that I feel like was a really interesting start to this relationship. That's one of the pieces, and really drew on a lot of my, new skills and existing skills to really try to navigate that, which we all were doing. We were all drawing on skills that we hadn't necessarily had to utilize in that way. I think the other thing that was really interesting that we should touch on is there was another entity that you had been talking to before that would ultimately become another partner of ours, but that was another facet of complexity, maybe is the right word, not negative, but in a way of as we came together in our partnership, we had a pandemic, and then we also had this discussion of expanding our reach. And so I think I'd love for you to talk a little bit about where that started, because I think as we shape the conversation for listeners around how do you think about succession, it's not always, it's not just like this clear cut thing. It really does have all these twists and turns when you're doing it with the type of intention that we did.
There are a couple of ways that you can scale a business from being, modest size to bigger, no matter how big you want to get. One is do it organically. Just have a great sales team and go out and sell new clients and grow that way and build the infrastructure behind it that you need and the operating talent that you need. And the other way is to essentially acquire it. And so a lot of people talk about, do I build or buy, right? Well, in this case, I had started a conversation with a firm that we had known for a long time, and they're our current ownership partners in the Spark Effect business because it was successful, and we'll tell that story a little bit. But I had approached our partner in San Francisco, a company called Torchiana, who I had known for many years, and we had worked collaboratively with as partners in the industry, covering our respective geographies. And I had approached them and said, what would you think about the idea of merging our two businesses? Well, as 2020 went on and we got into 2021, we had sidelined those conversations getting through COVID. Myself and the CEO of Torchiana, who is Rod Bacon, our current chief coaching officer. And we decided to reopen that. And it was really together.
And I think what was interesting for me for coming into that was thinking about, first of all, I think at the time, I was not yet an owner of the business.
Right.
That soon happened after around 2022,
Mm-hmm.
which allowed me to bring more skin into the game. It also, though, as we were in these conversations and merging this organization, it really trying to stick with our plan and yet bring others into the plan and trying to find alignment and working for all of us to have comfort level with this succession idea. And obviously me not knowing them or them knowing me as well as they had gotten to know you over the years. And I think that
Right.
was another one of those really pivotal moments of growth for all of us to think about as we wanted to become a stronger organization. We had all the complementary, aspects of what we did, and yet it was a big deal and big commitment. And I remember that as one of those other real big kind of moments of our partnership growing, but also really intentionally looking to grow our business at the same time. And that took a lot more intentionality and creating relationships in ways that were just kind of new for everybody when this idea kind of came into perspective.
It really became an effort of all of us having to take on that conversation about your role in the continuing business if we were going to come together and merge. And I just remember distinctly laying out, for example, with Rod, talking about you, talking about the things that I really respected about you and that I had seen in your involvement up to that point in the business and your background and your experience, and really laying that out and saying, this is the direction we were going in Waldron. Kim is going to be our COO, and I strongly encourage you to get to know her through these conversations so that you get comfortable with that possibility. And ultimately, we'll make those decisions. If we do come together, we'll make those decisions going forward together. But this is where we're going as Waldron, and I don't intend to depart from that pathway. But you've got to agree to that if we're going to move forward with merging the two companies, giving them the chance to get to know you
Mhm.
and to gain a modicum of the confidence that I had learned by working side by side for a year and a half at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We fast forward to, April 1st, 2023. We did complete the merger. By then we moved from two owners between you and me to five owners,
Hmm.
and started to really go then through this process of integrating and rebranding. And that was another challenging moment in this growth for
It
us.
was.
It was, as much as we had those shared values and we did so much of the same type of business as each organization, coming together and how we got work done was very different. And I can remember the realization of us having to integrate at the same time we had to redo our values and to find, more closer alignment in our mission. At the same time, we had to rebrand because as an organization in the mid-size world that we play in, it was too hard to keep those two brands independent.
Right.
And
And they were
that's
both
never what
very,
we,
very strong in
yeah,
their markets.
and it's
Yeah.
not what we wanted to do. So bringing that effort in was a real challenge in developing those relationships, right? Because it became this next level of experience of getting to know each other. And I think that that was a really tremendous learning experience for me, that I've taken away a lot of things that I would approach differently in a way that's just more insightful when I think about how work gets done
Hmm.
and the real differences that can emerge that can become friction points that can really challenge relationship building. And so
Right.
I'm thrilled that we moved through that in coming now into the third year. But I think that that was a really, as we think about again how this journey is never a straight line, is one
Hmm.
of those valuable moments that I have come to really appreciate about the experience of the last 6 years.
Yeah, and I remember that as being a very challenging year, mainly because of all the reasons that an integration is a
Yeah.
challenging period of time. We chose to take a best practices approach to each of our operating practices, and that meant that everybody had a voice.
Yep.
Let's show and tell. This is how we do things. This is how we do it. And the idea was not to adopt one or the other. The idea was to build the way we were going to do it as ultimately Spark Effect.
Yes.
So, but we really came out of the merger and then the integration much more able to build scale going forward.
Right. I agree. I think what that year really did for us all inside the organization was really learn how to trust in a different way, because everybody had a good tenure with each of their organizations prior. And so had the rhythm of business and how we get to know each other and do things just really down. And
Hmm.
I think when we came together in that year, our own practices were tested in how we show up and how we deliver feedback and how we get curious and how we build trust. And so to me, that was one of those moments where I was really trying to build my followership with people who were trusting me through an arm's length because of somebody else, one of our other owner partners who were starting to trust me. And so I think
Hmm.
that was, a really
That's
important
me.
year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so important, right? And trusting me through like getting to know Rod and Lynn and Christy, of people who trusted them to say, okay, well, if you're trusting Kim, then I'll work to extend that too. And so, but I think it was a year of a lot of that. It wasn't just an out of the gate, everybody was signing up. So that was a really important year for growth and
Yeah,
for
it was.
moving us to where we are today. As we talk about where we've come to, how did you, from your own perspective, really find yourself ready to make this handoff? Because I think with any succession conversation, there's this inner work that has to be done. And how did you talk about that for anybody who's listening and thinking about how they start this process? What did that look like for you?
Waldron, our consultancy had a deep background in helping organizations through succession planning efforts. And I personally had participated in some of those consulting projects where we were working with an executive team to help each person on the executive team identifying a role successor. And then the entire process of bringing best practices to that, creating criteria for each role so that you could assess in a very logical and effective way, in a fairly quick way of identifying people that you wanted to have be named successors for each role. And so coming from that background, it provided a great framework for me from which to proceed.
So, what about your own journey to get us to the place that we are today by, where we're making this shift, where
Yeah,
now, as I take over as CEO and you settle in as chairperson with all these other areas of interest that you'll continue to pursue and be relevant inside our company,
yeah.
what was that shift for you? Because I think every owner or CEO, when they're goes through their own work to determine now's the time, right? So yes, there's the criteria aspect, but there's also some of the inner work. And I think sharing some of that would be really valuable to those that would be listening as well.
Yeah, in short, it's when do you say it's time? From the perspective of somebody who's sitting in the chair and CEO job, when do you say it's time to transfer the CEO responsibilities to somebody else?
Yeah.
And what I felt, strongly that I needed to be in an involved way, leading through the merger.
Mhm.
There was years of familiarity with all of the owners at that point, and bringing that together and leading through the merger and getting to a position where, I felt that it's stable, it's well run, people are in the right roles, and I don't have to be as involved in leading day-to-day operating
Mhm.
leaders. And so that was accomplished, through the merger. And then through 2024 into 2025, I began a process of pulling away,
Mhm.
putting more responsibility, and it was more organic than it was formalized.
Yeah.
But I think if you asked anybody on our teams, they would experience more and more empowerment on a
Mhm.
kind of a graduated level, not in big chunks, but as in a graduated level, just pulling away from my visibility in day-to-day decision making, pulling away from even my presence in the region sometimes. Doing a little bit more travel, just being, allowing you the space
Yep.
to step into. And that's an important part, when you think about succession, if you're going to have an overlap where you're developing somebody, some people would say grooming, well, I don't see it really as a grooming process, but as you're helping them be the best at what they can be in an organization that one has been leading for some time. It's a matter of creating the space for them to fill as much as it is, what does the formal plan look like?
Mhm.
And so over time, I've pulled back and pulled back and pulled back, and at this point, we'll talk a little bit about the continuing roles, but it's been a continuum over time of empowerment and you filling the space.
Yeah.
And
And I think that's been helpful for both of us, where it hasn't
Mhm.
been, and for our team, that it's
Yeah,
because of the gradual nature, everybody's been comfortable in how those transitions have happened. It hasn't felt jarring. And that's one way that that a succession can happen. And it's the way that's worked really well for us. So as you transition into the chairperson of the board, you are continuing to remain very active in our community, in business development efforts, in aspects of the business of helping to support me and our team as we move through our strategy planning. Talk a little bit about how that will continue to look for you and what you're excited about.
Yeah, well, it's really grounded in the fact that I really love this business. It's been such a blessing to be able to work in a purpose-driven business. And so, I couldn't be more in love with the impacts that we have with our clients, with our commitment to community and the impacts that we help with there.
Mhm.
And that would be a huge gap in my life if that ability to contribute and continue to have that relevance suddenly was a big hole, and went away. And also, continuing ownership in the business, I will have the luxury of kind of picking and choosing the things that I want to go deep on. Some of that's going to be, some continuing client work as well. As I say, I'm in love with the impact that we have, and the reason that we go to work every day is, to help people with lives and livelihoods and help organizations and people achieve their full potential, to kind of use an overused slogan,
That's so
but
true.
it's so true for us. In that, I'll be chairing the board, which means that I'll have governance oversight. I'll be continuing to be involved in our financial management and oversight. Less management, more just from a governance standpoint. Um, I will be, as I said, doing some client work after being in business in the region for over 40 years. It's kind of natural to stay involved in that way. But being a little bit more strategic, a little bit more oversight, a little bit more governance, or I would say quite a bit more, just focused on governance and less on the day to day.
Yep.
And it's in incredibly able hands in Kim, in you.
Thank you. So as we wrap up our conversation, if we have business owners or CEOs or people just in this stage where that are listening who are thinking about it's time to think about succession more intentionally,
Hmm.
what's the one thing you wish someone maybe would have told you earlier, or would you impart on them to help them realize that this journey can be really fulfilling and in a way that maybe feels scary at first?
I would say start early.
Mhm.
Don't let it be a tragedy that really brings to the front of your mind the risk that the business now faces with the sole owner. The timeline has worked out beautifully, and it was very intentional all along the way, and very transparent. Everybody knew where we were going, who's in the company, and that's important. But I would say, start as early as you can. Out of all the uncertainty in the world, it is tremendously comforting to know that, particularly as an owner of a business, that it's going to be in good hands if something happened. I can't say enough about that. It sort of
Right.
just puts something to rest that you can count on, and you don't have to really spend a lot of worry about. And
Right.
as an owner of a business, you do worry. You worry. You worry about the success of the business. You worry about the motivation of your people at
Yeah.
every level. Are they really feeling like they're fulfilling the purpose aligned with the company's purpose? And we've hired that way, fortunately,
Mhm.
and I think that everybody in the company is here in part because of the kind of work that we do and the impact that we have. As an owner, you think about, are we fulfilling that? Are we living our
Right.
values, and are people engaged in an aligned purpose? That's another box to check and say, yeah, that feels pretty good.
I agree.
Yeah.
The one thing I want to just highlight that you mentioned, I think, is often used as a concern for planning and succession is transparency. As you said, we've always talked about this is the road. And I
Hmm.
think I've talked with, leaders we've advised where there are sometimes concerns about that transparency that, oh, if we are that transparent, everybody's going to leave. And that's really not the case. I think bringing people along in the process is a really valuable trust building exercise. And I think we've done that really well. And I would encourage others to consider that as a real positive versus it being used as a reason to not want to say anything, because that followership, as we talked about, is really critical, and it's a real opportunity in that process to engage others along the way. And so I think that's something to hope listeners consider as well. As we bring our conversation to a close, I want to personally thank you for the trust you've put in me, that we've taken this journey together, and we'll continue it in its evolved way. And really appreciate, Mike, what you've built in this organization and what we're going to continue to do moving forward. So thank you very much in allowing me to be a part of this succession plan, and I'm excited for where we go next.
It's been a great journey, Kim, and it's such a pleasure working with you every single day and every moment. I really have come to enjoy it, and so I'm in a very, very comfortable place with regard to shifting my responsibilities and even making more space for you at the top. And it's the right thing to do. You've earned it. You've really earned it.
Thank you so much. For our listeners, we have resources relevant to our conversation today that you can access by visiting couragetoadvancepodcast.com. And remember to like and follow our podcast on your favorite platform so more leaders can benefit from these conversations. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Courage to Advance, where transformative leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about having the courage to find them.